All right, again. In this video, I'm going to examine the concept of cohesion and coherence, two terms that almost refer to the same thing when we're talking about writing. Both of them have to do with how the thesis of your paper controls what goes in it, that's the idea of coherence, and how the different elements, different paragraphs of your paper are connected, tied together. That's the cohesion part of it. So I won't use those terms that much because they are both kind of related to tying things back to the thesis. Before we get to the thesis of this first paper, this is Against the Odds. This is the essay that appears in your Little Seagull textbook on page 161. I'm using a PDF version of it here. It's a little easier to navigate in a presentation like this. You'll notice, first of all, the Mla formatting you'll want to use. Be sure to center your title. It's a good example of a title that gives its topic, Harry Truman and Election in 1948, and the stance or position the paper takes against the odds, really talking about what a long shot win this looked like at the time, maybe not so much as we look at it in hindsight. The thesis for this particular paper occurs in the second paragraph. Normally you want to put it at the end of the first paragraph. That's certainly where I'll expect to find it. Really what the first paragraph is, though, is a terrific example of how to use that they-say strategy to create some interest. Here are a number of headlines that talk about how Dewey's election as president is a foregone conclusion. The Life magazine puts Dewey on the cover with the next president of the United States. Even works down to where Truman's own wife thought he was going to be beaten. That's maybe the ultimate, they say, for a politician is when your wife thinks you're going to lose. So these are 3 or 4 examples of how the country seemed to be absolutely convinced that Dewey was going to win the election, and it turns out that Truman won. The second paragraph provides some statistical numbers, shows us what the actual results of the election were. It is probably important that this stuff is shown sooner than later. And the thesis occurs at the end of that paragraph, and it's a classic example of a paragraph of a thesis statement that includes tension and divisions. Although Truman's defeat was heavily predicted, that's the tension. This is what most people thought was going to happen. Those predictions themselves, Dewey's passiveness as a campaigner, Truman's zeal turned the tide for Truman's victory. All right, so the 3 divisions then, the predictions or polls, the way Dewey campaigned, the way Truman campaigned, they become the major divisions of the paper. And so as far as cohesion goes, then the primary information we're going to include in the paper is information about the polls, about Dewey's campaign, about Truman's campaign. That's the cohesion part of it. The coherence part of it. We want information that develops those ideas. The cohesion part of it is showing how each paragraph then is connected back to the thesis. So I'll talk about that now. Here's the first topic sentence. Here's the topic sentence of the first body paragraph. In the months preceding the election, public opinion polls predicted that Dewey would win by a large margin. I can't emphasize how important it is to make these first topic sentences relatively short, simple sentences. You see that this is its job is to kind of show us a little bit where we are in time, months preceding the election, but the main part is to introduce that the polls were predicting Dewey would win by a large margin. So the public opinion polls, that's the language here that connects this topic sentence back to the thesis, the predictions themselves. Then as we go through, we'll see that that topic is developed with a number of sources, relying primarily on, here's a good parenthetical citation, and other analysts believe the overwhelming predictions. There's the kind of signal phrase. According to the political analysis Samuel LaBelle, those Democrats, etc. That's a really good example of a signal phrase. So the paragraph themselves is developed by different perspectives from different sources, not really relying on the student to carry the weight here. This is the job of the sources. Now, when we get to the next body paragraph, historians and political analysts alike cite Dewey's overly cautious campaign as one of the main reasons Truman was able to achieve victory. Again, pretty straightforward. not very complicated sentence that introduces a couple of things. The new topic, we're going to look at Dewey's campaign, and that links back to our thesis here, Dewey's passiveness as a campaigner. It also achieves the necessary function of moving from the polls to another topic. And you'll see that that work was actually begun in the last sentence of the previous paragraph. Whatever the impact on the voters, the polling numbers had a decided effect on Dewey. And it turns out that he bought into the polls and sort of relaxed or decided to run out the clock or not take a lot of risk in the campaign. So there's a case where that sentence at the end of the polling paragraph begins to build a bridge to the next part of the paper. So we circle back to the thesis, but we also have a movement from one idea to another. Now, in the next body paragraph, as his campaign continued, observers noted that Dewey seemed uncomfortable in crowds. And again, this connects to that cautious campaign that he ran. Again and again through the autumn of 1948, Dewey's campaign speeches failed to address the issues. Again, probably an example of, it certainly connects back to his cautiousness as a candidate. So we move to the third division of the paper. Few candidates in U.S. history have campaigned for the presidency with more passion and faith than Harry Truman. Again, short, direct, clear topic sentence. But when we go back and look at where we are on the thesis, Truman's zeal, well, faith and passion, that's pretty much the definition of zeal. And so there's another example of how the topic sentences are directly connected back to the thesis. As this continues, he spoke in large cities and crowds, defending his policies, attacking Republicans. So we see more of the passionate campaign that Truman put on. The paper ends with taking the kind of why it's important idea of this, the legacy and lessons of Truman's campaign. So taking it from more than just a report, but showing how Truman's victory and some of the polling errors changed the way campaigns were done in the future. All right, it's a standard way to finish a paper and moves to its eventual conclusion here. So that was an example of a causal analysis. I mean, it's certainly a paper that is looking for the causes of Truman's victory and looking at some of the effects or the outcomes that followed from it. Classic causal analysis. Now, the other sample essay that I've put in the module this week is an example of an evaluation paper. And again, I've talked about this thesis before in the discussion of what is a thesis-based paper. It too is, so it's not a paper that's trying to explain causes, it's a paper that's trying to answer the question, what makes Juno a good film, what makes Juno a bad film? And it sort of lands not so much in between. It is a paper very positive about it, but it acknowledges that there are some weaknesses with the film. That is exactly, though, what holds the paper together. It makes it fairly easy to orient yourself in the paper because of the way the thesis statement strongly lays out what the paper is trying to accomplish. So the tension, again, is although there are weaknesses, although the situation Juno's characters find themselves in and their dialogue may be criticized as unrealistic, the film successfully portrays the emotions of a teen being shoved into maturity way too fast. So again, the emotional effect of the film is what the student sees as the great accomplishment of the film, acknowledging that some of the other aspects may be hard to believe. So if you look at the way then that idea of realistic, unrealistic emotion, situations, dialogue, those are the ideas that show up in the topic sentences and the ones that connect us back to the thesis statement. So much of the time, Juno seems unrealistic because it seems to treat the impact of teen pregnancy so lightly. Well, this is the situation, right? The situation, the character is unrealistic. Likewise, Juno's dialogue is too good to be true, funny and clever but unrealistic. So both of those connect to that first aspect. Then as we transition to sort of the second part of the thesis, but although the situations in dialogue are unrealistic, there's a nice little capsulizing of where we are right now, what we've already developed. Situations, dialogue unrealistic, but where the film really is terrific is in the emotional heart of the film is believable and moving. And then that's the part that's developed in this paragraph. The next paragraph, the juxtaposition of Juno's teenage quirks and adult situation she's in reminds us of her youth and vulnerability. Again, I think explaining how the film achieves that emotional impact. Here, the film, this one also links back to the thesis. We're going to take up the topic of dialogue again. First of all, agreeing again with this central premise. While the dialogue is too clever to be realistic, in the end it's carried by the movie's heart. The dialogue turns out to be more effective, the paper is arguing, because of the way we respond to the characters. Then it also comes back to that idea of the situation, assuming that, or pointing out here that some of the critics complained about the film, that Juno did not present a good role model for teen girls, and acknowledges that and then takes that idea on a little bit. But regardless, it is certainly the way critics responded to it. It is part of the discussion of the film. And then the thesis, the conclusion begins with a restatement, not a repeating of the thesis. I've had people just simply copy and paste the thesis in the conclusion. You want to restate it, although Juno is a comedy filled with improbable situations, exaggerations, and wit. That's the unrealistic situations in dialogue. It's genuine emotional analysis to connect with and relate to the film. So there's an excellent example of restating the thesis and reminding the reader of the important points that support that, and that ultimately is the basis of evaluating the film. So that's, in a nutshell, how we achieve cohesion and coherence. It is something we accomplish by crafting a thesis statement that clearly states your main point, but also gives the reader some indication of the parts of your argument or discussion that you're going to develop. Then as you hit different parts of the thesis, you want to use language to clearly connect a word here, this word unrealistic showing up over and over in this particular paper, emotion showing up in this paper over and over again. That's not repetitious if it's intended to help the reader work their way through the paper. So I'll wrap up there. Again, any questions or further questions, email me, contact me. We can have a conference, take a look at where you are in the process of your paper. Certainly the application assignment this week, this is the work I want you to do, is to revise your thesis and then go ahead and write what the topic sentences of the body paragraphs are going to be. Plant those words that connect. And one of the things I do in that application assignment is rewrite the topic sentences for the student paper that we looked at in the earlier video about the American Dream, the films that depict the American Dream. And I rewrote them and specifically trying to connect language in the topic sentences back to the thesis. And so one of the things I want you to do in that application assignment is underline those words like unrealistic, situation, emotions that connect the topic sentences to the thesis. All right, thanks for watching.